Last winter, I went on a trip to see a few friends from college. The drive over was 18 hours, so I did it in two 9-ish hour sections, staying at an Airbnb on the way. It was the same thing on the way back too, but I'd booked a different Airbnb just for fun. I guess I thought it would be nice to see some different areas and whatnot. Anyway, a bit of heavy snow had caused some delays, and I didn't arrive in town until 9 p.m. It was a very small area, which I was already aware of because there were pretty much no big towns or cities at the halfway point of this 18-hour drive. The last Airbnb had been in a small town as well, but this one was noticeably much smaller. A few stores bordered the road, but all the houses were either on farms or super far apart from each other. When I got to my Airbnb, it was no different. It was super far from the other houses. However, the outside was somewhat modernized. It clearly had some cabin-style features, but it almost looked out of place compared to all the other houses in the area. I parked on the gravel driveway and went up to the door, putting in the code and going inside the house. I'd seen the pictures of the inside online, and it looked to be about the same. I went around and checked all the rooms, then put my things in the bedroom. I then went down to the couch. As soon as I sat down and picked up the TV remote, I began to hear a tapping noise coming from right behind me. I quickly turned my head around and saw a woman standing outside the window, tapping on the glass. Her hair was unkempt and long, and she had a crazy sort of look in her eyes. Once she got my attention, though, she pointed toward the front door and walked away from the window. I got up with my heart racing from the unexpectedness of this all. I made my way over to the door, knowing it was probably just some old lady. I didn't exactly feel scared, but I wasn't feeling safe either, if that makes any sense. I cracked the door open just enough to talk to her. The woman smiled and said she needed some assistance. I waited for a moment for her to explain what was going on, but after a while she still hadn't said anything. I asked what exactly she needed help with. She looked behind herself, saying she had lost something in the road just outside the house. I looked out there, not being able to see anything past the low lights of the Airbnb. "I'm not really sure if I can help you with that," I said. Her smile immediately left her face, and then she repeated herself like a robot. The entire thing, too, word for word about her losing something out on the road. "Yeah, I know, but I don't think I can help. I'm sorry," I said. I closed the door and waited for a minute until I could hear her leave, then went back to the couch. I wasn't sure if she was just some crazy old lady, or if there was something more nefarious going on, but it was very strange. I relaxed a bit and turned on the TV, watching some shows until 11 p.m. At that point, I got tired and climbed into bed. I think I still felt a bit uncomfortable though, because I found it very hard to fall asleep. All I remember is laying in bed restless for a whole hour. I was abruptly woken up sometime in the middle of the night to a sound coming from the front of the house. It was quiet, but with the rest of the house being completely silent, it really stood out. My mind immediately went to that woman from earlier. I got up from the bed and nervously walked down the hallway, then looked at where I was hearing this from, the front door. I rushed over to stop them, but the door had opened just as I got my body against it. I pressed all my weight into the door, as whoever was on the other side seemed to try and do the same. I'm a pretty big guy, so whoever was out there must have had a fair deal of strength. For a moment, it felt like they might actually overpower me and force the door open. They gave up after a few seconds of pushing, though, and sprinted down the driveway. I locked the door and ran to the window, trying to get a good view of who was out there, but they were already past the line of light. I thought through my options for a second, then ran to grab my things from my bedroom and went out to my car. I drove away. I didn't want to be at that house any longer. I knew police in a small town like that wouldn't be helpful at all. I don't know who was behind that door, but I'm sure they had to have been associated with the woman from earlier that night. If I had went out to help her, or if I had woken up even a moment later, I don't think I would have been seen again after that night. Frankensteins, Draculas, zombies, mummies, and many more were all on the dance floor. The whole club was practically full of monsters because it was Halloween night. One of my friends had asked me to go clubbing with her. Everyone was dressed up in their costumes and the music was blasting out of the speakers. Everyone was enjoying themselves and the festivities of the night. It was a strange sight to see all these creeps and ghouls flirting and dancing casually. I came to the club dressed up as a witch, but since I'm quite a shy person, I was spending most of the night up against the wall sipping on my drink and watching my friends dance. Just as I was about to start regretting my decision to come there, a guy in a costume approached me. He was dressed up like the Grim Reaper. He wore a jet black hooded robe and had this bony white skull mask on that really stood out. This Grim Reaper grabbed my hand, and I noticed his hand was abnormally cold. He pulled me as if to try and escort me somewhere. Since I was alone, I figured I might as well try and join in on the fun at least. If I followed, it would be more exciting than standing alone all night. We weaved in and out of the people dancing on the dance floor. At that moment, someone grabbed my other hand and shouted in my ear, "Hey, don't go with that guy." I spun around to see who it was. As I did so, the Grim Reaper immediately let go of my hand and disappeared amongst the mass of people on the dance floor. The other guy also let go of my hand as well. I didn't realize how cold that first guy's hand had been until he let go. I looked around for that guy, but I couldn't see him anywhere. The next morning, it was reported in the news that some of the residents nearby had found some Halloween costumes strewn about the neighborhood. One of them was the Grim Reaper costume, and there were a couple of others as well. I don't know what was going on with all those people, but I'm sure I wouldn't be around today if I'd followed that guy where he was leading me. He seemed to be taking me towards the outside of the club. I don't know who that person was who stopped me, but I'm very grateful for their assistance. I also don't know why the costumes were randomly abandoned in the neighborhood. Were those other costumes accomplices of that Grim Reaper? Or were they costumes of the people he'd managed to lure outside before me? I have a lot of unanswered questions, and thinking about it gives me chills. I don't think I'll ever have the answers. This happened last October when I was on my way home from a drinking night with my work colleagues. I caught the last train home and arrived at my station right as it came to about 1 a.m. It was Halloween, which was something I didn't particularly care about since we don't really do much for it here in Japan. I live in quite a rural area, so the station was empty, or so I thought. As I walked down towards the ticket gate, I saw a woman in a costume. She seemed a bit too old to be a trick-or-treater, I thought to myself. As I drew closer, I recognized that she was wearing some sort of witch costume. She looked as if she was waiting for someone. At the moment I passed her by, she abruptly called out to me though. "Hey, where do you live?" I continued walking. It was so surreal. I just looked back over my shoulder. She was stood there staring at me. She had long, dark, messy hair, and I remember at the time that only one of her eyes were visible through it. That kind of freaked me out. It was a bit dark in this underground station, and it was an eerie sight to see her standing there. I didn't know how else to explain it. There's no reason to get involved, don't respond, I told myself, as I upped my pace and headed out the exit. It takes about 15 minutes to get home from the station on foot. At that time of night, in my rural area, I knew there would be practically no one out on the streets. It did make me feel a little nervous while I was walking home. I could hear dogs howling in the distance, and my footsteps seemed to echo behind me. It was all adding to this eerie ambiance. I kept looking over my shoulder. When I turned around a corner to see someone stood underneath a streetlight, the silhouette of a woman, I wanted to pass by quickly. Something was really off about tonight. The first time I'd ever felt this way on Halloween. "Where do you live?" a familiar voice asked. Shivers raced up and down my spine. It was that same woman in the Halloween costume from the station. I looked back, and she took a step toward me. I started bolting. I ran, checking over my shoulder. I ran out of breath eventually, and got a real stitch too. Goddamn beers. I had to stop in a dark alleyway to take a break. I looked back behind me, and I couldn't find that woman anywhere. I walked down the alley feeling a bit relieved. "Where do you live?" My heart froze. What the hell was happening? I was shaking. This time I didn't see her at all. I didn't even hear her coming. It sounded as if she was directly above me or something. I spun around in every direction. I was really panicking now. I shut my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, I saw her emerging from behind something, slowly walking toward me. "Where do you live?" Why is this happening to me? My legs were trembling. Even though I was still drunk, I'd never felt fear like that before or since. I didn't know what to do. This lady wouldn't leave me alone, and if I walked all the way home, she would surely find a way to follow me. I pointed to a random house across the street from the alley and blurted out that I lived there. The woman in the costume turned her head slowly toward the house I was pointing at. She then gave a big smile and looked back at me one last time, then back toward the house. With that strange woman now distracted, I took my opportunity to run for it again. I looked over my shoulder to see if she was still following me, but she was just stood still, staring at the house I'd pointed at. She was so creepy. Was this some kind of Halloween prank? I had no idea, but I didn't want to find out. I got home and triple-checked all the doors and windows were locked. I stayed up half the night, watching out the window to see if the woman was out there somewhere. I didn't see her, though. Time went by, but I couldn't forget about that strange experience. I can't really remember her face that well, and my memory's a little bit hazy from being drunk. I still get shivers every now and then when I think about that night. A few weeks after the incident on a Sunday, I was taking a walk with my daughter in the neighborhood. I noticed a moving truck, and the truck was parked right outside the house I'd pointed at that day. I remembered that woman's voice, asking me where I lived. I shuddered. I thought to myself at the time, surely it's a coincidence. The people who lived there were just moving out for something else. But honestly, I wondered if maybe she did something to them that made them want to move out. The owners of the house came out holding boxes and looked exhausted and miserable. Something must have happened there. I could still hear that woman's voice ringing in my head. "Where do you live?" I grabbed my child's hand and started to walk away as fast as I could. I don't go anywhere near that area now, if I can avoid it. A couple of years ago, I moved out of my dorm room and into a new apartment. Of the few pieces of furniture that we had in the dorm, none of it was mine, so I was basically in need of everything. I had more money than I did before and was planning to save for a few more months before making a bunch of purchases on things for the apartment. There were still a few things I did need right away though. One of these was a bed frame, but they were all really expensive. After buying a new mattress, I was really trying not to drop a whole fat stack of cash on a new frame too. I pulled up a few used furniture sites, but eventually landed on Craigslist as it had the most postings there. A lot of them were really cheap, or even free, but those ones all looked horrible. Then I came across one that didn't look too bad. It was just a plain old wooden bed frame that didn't look too beat up. I sent a quick email asking if it was still available, then went on with my search. About a minute later, I got a reply. The man said it was still available for $35. That was a perfect deal for me. I quickly accepted his offer and we set up a time to meet later that day at 6. While I waited, I unboxed some of my things and moved a bunch of stuff around in the bedroom to make some space for that new frame. At 5:30, the man emailed me his address. It was about 20 minutes away, in an area I hadn't been to yet. Well, I wasn't exactly familiar with anywhere around here too well though, since I'd just moved. I grabbed some cash and headed out. As I drove, I looked around frequently, trying to get myself familiar with what was around me. About halfway there, everything sort of dropped off though. The town I was in very quickly ended, and the area became a lot less populated, with buildings or houses. It was not what I'd expected. As I got to the neighborhood this house was supposed to be in though, I felt a little bit better. The houses weren't too far apart, and it did look mostly normal. However, they were definitely not nice-looking houses. I pulled up to the address and parked in the driveway. The lights were on and the front door had been left open. I got out and walked up, ringing the doorbell. The man came a moment later. He was tall and heavy, wearing a hat and jacket. He invited me inside. The man didn't look strange in any way, but something about him made me feel weird. It was just the way he talked, I guess, kinda like we'd been buddies for years now. I followed him upstairs and down the hallway that led to a small bedroom. We stepped into the room, and I was immediately confused. The room was occupied with a dresser, nightstand, and even clothes laying around. The bed frame still had a mattress on it, with sheets and blankets as well. I clarified with him that I was only wanting to buy the frame and not the mattress or anything else. He said of course. I looked back over at the bed frame, seeing that it looked fine. I said I'd buy it, and he smiled. He offered to help me drag it out to my truck, but said he'd want a drink before we got to it. The man walked back into the hallway and came back immediately with 2 glasses of beer that he must have been keeping in the next room over. He held one out to me, but I politely declined. The man looked very confused. "Come on, it'll be fun." He acted like we might as well hang out since we were already here. I told him I was really busy that night, and I just wanted to buy the bed frame and get out of there. He was being really pushy though. His smile became noticeably less genuine as he urged me to have a sip of this drink with him. I quickly stepped past him and out into the hallway, not wanting to be cornered into that small room. I told him I was going to leave. I turned to walk out, and he immediately changed his attitude. He started being overly nice, apologizing and asking if I wanted to take the bed frame for free even. I ignored him and began walking faster down the stairs. I heard the man coming after me down the hallway. I was able to get out before he caught up to me, and I saw him standing at the front door as I pulled away. Maybe he was just some lonely guy living out there that wanted a buddy to hang out with, but that was all just a little too strange. I mean, the supposed bed frame and room it was in were clearly in use by someone. When I got home that night, I checked the posting again, but it was deleted. From my memory though, I knew the bed frame was shown by itself with no mattress or anything on it. Now that I thought about it, that made it even stranger that it wasn't like that when I got there, considering his intent had been to sell it. but whatever that man was up to, I didn't like it, so I just got out of there. This happened when I was a student. When I was at university, I was in a club with this girl who was a year younger than me. She really liked me. She was a nice girl and very popular too, and one day she confessed her love to me. Thing is, I liked another girl, so I politely refused her advances. She got really angry. She was so shocked that I'd had the audacity to refuse her. Due to how extreme her reaction actually was, I had to quit going to the club. Life went on and we were getting ready to graduate. My attention turned more towards job hunting. I graduated and I hadn't seen her again in all that time. Truth be told, I'd done my absolute best to avoid her after the way she'd reacted to my rejection. I managed to get a job working in Tokyo, and I started living alone. It was great. After about 3 months or so, I came back from work around midnight. I was trying to make a name for myself, so I was putting in as many hours as I could in my profession. I checked my mailbox, and I found that I had a letter in there that didn't have a stamp on it. I opened it. It was a letter from that girl that had liked me. A lot of old memories from my university days came back up. It was quite nostalgic. It had been a while since then. The letter said this: "I still can't forget about you." The whole thing was written in a tone as if she was still angry when she'd written it. It went on to say more. "You know, I had a hard time finding this place. I came all this way to see you, but you weren't home. You really disappointed me." This was especially creepy, since I'd never given out my address to anyone beside my parents yet. I turned to the next page. There was a drawing of what looked like she and I holding hands. I looked at the drawing. We were smiling and gazing deeply into one another's eyes. It was a fairly well-drawn piece of art, which made it even more creepy. Just to draw it this well from her imagination of me from years ago, that obsession really amazed me. I looked at the hair on the drawing as well. It seemed especially lifelike. When I touched it, I was surprised to find that there was real hair glued to the paper. She had glued each strand so carefully that I hadn't even noticed it wasn't drawn at first. If I had to hazard a guess, I would think that it was her hair. I'm in the process of moving now, but even if I move, I wonder if she'll somehow be able to track me down again. I find myself thinking often these days, what would have happened if I was home that night? Would she have confronted me? What would she have done to me? It really creeps me out. Don't worry though, guys. I keep checking my doors and windows to make sure they're shut and locked. These days, I am a bit freaked out every time I leave the house though. I wear one of those face masks just in case. I don't want her to recognize me instantly. I know it's a bit silly, but I'll let you guys know if anything else happens. But it's really amazing to me just how obsessed some people can be. This happened when I was living at university. I'm a woman, and at the time I was living alone. I was living in a really small town called Hikashi Kawaguchi. My home phone was ringing, and I answered it. The voice on the other end asked, "Is this Emily? I'm calling from the only hospital in this particular town." We spoke for a while, and this person said they were a doctor who specialized in some sort of medicine. This all came at the time coronavirus was at its peak in Japan. It seemed to be some sort of courtesy call. I was happy enough to listen to this doctor's advice. The only thing was, I'd never heard of this doctor before, and I'd never had an appointment with him either. Usually when a doctor calls or when you call your doctor, they already know all your personal info like your name, your home address, etc. The doctor should have all the information about your last visit as well, right? He asked me a few questions and I confirmed the answers. Everything else seemed to be completely above board. He then asked me to participate in a questionnaire about my personal life. I thought to myself, why not? If it helps people during this pandemic, that can only be a good thing, right? He began to ask me some questions. It was okay at first, but it started to get weird pretty quickly. It began with completely normal, non-offensive, and non-intrusive questions. For example, have you had a cold or cold-like symptoms lately? Have you been to the hospital in the recent past? As he continued on, the line of questioning changed though. What kind of clothes do you like to dress in? What are you currently wearing? Then he asked me, did you know that breast cancer is on an increase at the moment? What cup size are you? That can really be a factor. I refused to answer. I gasped when the doctor then said, I think I'll need to pay you a personal visit. I'll be there in 7 minutes. The phone then hung up. I stood there shocked, gripping my phone. I bolted out the front door and ran to stay with a friend. I stayed there through the whole night. When I went back to my place, I was really glad to see that it hadn't been burgled or anything. I'm an idiot, so I didn't call the police to make a report. The more I thought about that creepy call, though, the more I started to get a bit frightened. This was not some guy trying to get his rocks off. This was not a heavy breather call, not some neck beard either. This guy was methodical. What was extra spooky was the fact that he said he would be at my apartment within 7 minutes. And that really stood out to me. Usually, if people are making things up, they'd say something in a multiple of 5, right? But that was really precise. I checked Google Maps and saw the hospital was over 15 minutes away. It was so weird. I didn't get a call like that again either. That was a bit of a relief, as this had been playing on my mind quite a lot and making me look over my shoulder everywhere I went. As time went by, my feelings of fear towards this guy turned to feelings of anger. I didn't want to live my life scared. My friend suggested that if I really wanted to figure out who that call was from, I should ask the phone company. Well, I called the phone company up, and we found out the call had come from a payphone pretty close by. It was exactly 7 minutes away. Half a year had passed since then. I still had that creepy call in the back of my mind. Then one day, my home phone rang just as I was heading out to work. I picked it up. Hi, I'm from AT&T. This is the cell phone company. We've been trying to get in touch with you. As I understand, there's been a bit of a dip in service in this area. We wanted to get in touch and see if you're experiencing any issues yourself. I was in a rush and didn't really have time for this, so I said that I couldn't help. They then said they would call back at a more convenient time. I told them I wouldn't be free until after 6. Thank you. For callback purposes, could you let me know your cell phone number? I'll call you back after 6 p.m. I was a bit hesitant because of what happened before. Well, why don't you just give me your information, and then I can call you back myself when I get home from work. How about that? The line immediately went dead. Was this happening all over again? When I went to work, I told my boss about what happened, and he decided we should call the cops right now. Whoever was doing this was definitely trying to get to me while I was home alone. I didn't feel safe anymore. I had no idea if I was being watched or what. I flinched every time the doorbell rang. I decided to just move house eventually. I'm pretty sure that I'm safe now, as I've moved quite far away. Maybe the guy from the hospital and the guy from AT&T were the exact same person, but I couldn't really tell by just the voice, since it had been so long between. I've never told this to anyone. This was when I was a little kid. We were at a park with a circular lake. On one end was the parking lot and exit, pretty much where most of the people were. On the other end was nothing but woods, which was a little unsettling because of the contrast. People would often walk around the lake or jog for exercise, so I decided to take a walk too. You know that feeling in public, where it feels like you're alone even though you're not? I felt that way when I got to the lonely forested end of the lake. I went to turn around and happened to glance at the woods for a moment. I shit you not, I saw the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Picture this, a thick, hollow log on the ground, blending in with the forest floor. As I happened to gaze at the end of that log, I could see a person's face. Their eyes went bug-eyed. They had a big surprised expression, as if I'd just caught them doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. I ran back to my family, and we decided not to go to that park ever again. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.